Hello, MedTech Insight enthusiasts. This is Dr. Jennifer Joe with my co-host, the fabulous Dr. Ami Bhatt. When Dr. Bhatt isn't hosting the show, she's running the Mass General Hospital telecardiology program, seeing congenital heart disease patients, and teaching at the Harvard Medical School. When I'm not hosting the show, I see patients in the emergency room, urgent care, and hospitalist settings. We both support a number of traditional medtech and up-and-coming digital health startups. We both believe that healthcare can be better both for the clinician and for patients. You can find both of us giving local, national, and international talks regularly. The MedTech Insights is a live, weekly, interactive talk show led by me and Ami, where we interview two guest leaders in digital health every Tuesday at 12 noon. You can watch live on the MedTech Insights Facebook page, Ami or my personal Facebook page, the Vanguard.Health YouTube page, and through my personal LinkedIn page. When you tune in live, write comments in any of these places. We'll try to feature your comments on the show and also incorporate your questions to our guests. We love comments, so don't be shy, and please tell us who you are.
Fantastic. We are so excited to be with you today. It is bright and sunny in Boston. It's going to hit a high of 80. So if Jen and I look like we're smiling more than usual, the rainy season has ended for us, which is really exciting. Or if I look
shinier than usual, I haven't connected my air conditioning to the window.
That's, yep. There's also central air, but in any case, so.
So you speak as one of the lucky ones to have central air.
I do speak as a lucky one. Very excited for today's show. Wanted to also just mention a couple fun things that happened in this past week. So one of our good friends and future show member, Daniel Kraft, got a group of innovators together last week in Boston, all vaccinated. Very excited to have Boston opening up some. Very excited to have so many vaccinated friends and to be able to talk about what people have done over the past year. Amazing how much innovation has happened as people have been kind of, both locked away from COVID, but also really inspired to make things work better and sometimes forced to make things work better. So excited to have Daniel Kraft join us a couple of shows from now. We also had a very nice clubhouse get together with our friend Saul Kaplan from the Business Innovation Factory. And he brought Vala Afshar and some others together to really, again, talk about how are we going to do this with really human-centered design? And that was a great clubhouse conversation. And so really looking forward to having Saul join us as well and talk more about human-centered design. So those were just two really nice ways I think our community reached out a little bit and got a chance to see each other again, virtually or in person, and continue to innovate. We're excited to have all of you here in the audience. Please announce yourselves as you come on and type in where you're coming from. Because again, for Dr. Joe and I, this is such an opportunity to bring our community together and to chat and to ask questions, important ones, silly ones, all the above. So speaking of friends, it just turns out that our guests today, unbeknownst to us, were med school classmates, which is great for us to find out. So today we have Dr. Andrew Lee and Dr. Shaan Gandhi coming to us. So maybe we'll start with bringing out Dr. Andrew Lee. He is the head of Bowie Health, and as CEO of Bowie Health has really changed how we can harness information that is out there and available already from clinical research, from trials, and be able to help patients really try and figure out what's going on for themselves. So let's talk about AI algorithms with Dr. Andrew Lee.
Very excited for Dr. Andrew Lee.
Thanks, guys.
Great to have you with us. Great to have you with us. So for those people who haven't yet learned about Bowie Health, will you tell us a little bit about kind of your course and your story? You came through kind of clinical medicine, but what was the inspiration behind Bowie Health? And then we'll kind of dive into a little bit more about what you're doing now.
Sure. So the origin story is in Boston and actually at MGH. I was doing my last year of clinical medicine. I was going to go be a neurosurgeon. That was kind of my life's dream. And then my last rotation was in the emergency room at MGH. And I kept seeing all these patients who were Googling their symptoms before coming to the ER. So I still remember this very stark story. 2 a.m., I saw a woman with a jammed finger. followed by a guy who had an ulcer on his foot from a history of poorly controlled diabetes. The ulcer had become infected. We had to amputate his leg that night. And I still remember talking to the first person and being like, hey, your finger's fine, you can go home. And she pulls out these printouts from WebMD telling me why her finger was broken, why she was waiting in the ER for 4 hours. And then with the very next person, when I said, sir, I'm so sorry, had you come in 2 days ago, we could have saved your leg. He pulls out printouts from WebMD telling me why he had waited, why he didn't go to the doctor, why he didn't think we should amputate. And then right around then, after seeing those two patients, back to back on both ends of the spectrum, my dad kind of fell into the latter camp. I found out that he had a mini stroke while he was on his employer's treadmill. And I'm one of 3 kids. My 2 sisters are both docs too. And so I was like, why didn't you call us for help? And he was like, you guys were working. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't you Google it? And he said, I don't trust what I'd find on Google. And so for me, that was this really emotional tipping point. 3 months before graduating, I took this very delusional sabbatical from school. In the families, I probably gave my dad a second stroke when I told him. But just became obsessed with this idea that you have all these different front doors to healthcare. And they're all great. You have emergency room, you have urgent care, primary care, telemedicine. And every single day there's some new, venture-backed virtual front door for some new part of the population. However, the sidewalk to those front doors, to extend the analogy a little bit, is still Google, where 72% of Americans start their healthcare journey. And the core kind of underlying thesis to all of this is that healthcare has never really worked as an efficient marketplace because the patient, the demand side, doesn't really understand what a part of supply they should go to, regardless of whether that's a clinician or going to a minute clinic or going to get an over-the-counter medication. And that uncertainty, that lack of understanding comes in 2 parts. One is a clinical piece, clinical self-triage, clinical self-education, clinical self-diagnosis. And then there's an insurance or payment piece, right? It's like, okay, even if I knew I should see a physical therapist, the one down the street is out of network. The one 2 blocks away is in network. Both of those, gaps in knowledge are just really difficult to fill. And so, what people do today is they either call their mom for help or they Google it. And so we felt like there's got to be a better way. So for the last 7 years, we've been building a product and a company focused on building a scalable technology that can help people figure out clinically what's going on. And then if we understand your insurance design, if we understand your benefit design, then taking that a step further and showing you what services, if any, are in network for you in your area that's clinically relevant, that's open at this point in time. So that's what we're up to, and that's what I'll start.
I love this analogy. I also love the concept of putting those 2 things together, right? There's a lot of people who work on how do you really utilize the information that's out there via the internet to be able to diagnose yourself. But what you do with that is very hard. That next step of really navigating the healthcare system, that's a level of health literacy that is actually very challenging to achieve for even the most well-educated people, because we don't really make it easy. And so I love the idea of linking those 2 things together. So I think, Andrew, did you have a couple slides that you could show of kind of how this works and how would I engage with you? What would I look up and find? And then how would I end up with the right person, for my twisted finger?
And while Andrew is pulling up those slides to share with the audience, I want to say thank you to the audience member who are tuning in. Hi, Dr. Co.
I am everywhere. I love that.
I know he is everywhere. Dr. Co, I don't know what he does now, but he was the transplant surgeon when I was training at Mass General. So good to see you, Dickon. And then we have audience member who's joined from Singapore. Welcome, and really appreciate that you're staying up late to join us from Singapore. Very interested in what you're working in. And then we have, sorry, I'm scrolling here. Manav from Boston. Thanks for tuning in and watching.
Awesome. Can Dr. Joe and Dr. Bhatt, can you guys see my screen okay?
We can. This is perfect. Thank you.
Great. And so I'm not going to walk you through a bunch of slides. I'm just going to show you just a quick demo of what this looks like. And so It starts out by asking you some really simple demographic questions, and then it goes into a search for your symptoms. The search has actually been powered by over 45 million unique searches that have already happened on Buoy.
That's great.
It then goes into this Q&A process, and the Q&A is actually, what's happening is it's not a protocol, it's not a decision tree. It's basically saying of the 30,000 possible questions one could ask, which one is statistically most relevant? Initially it was based purely on primary literature, but now it's based off of millions of people who have used Buoy and then told us.
This is kind of insane.
This is phenomenal. So go back for 1 second. Now you have 7 years and millions of responses on Buoy that you can study, right?
Right.
When you first started, did you take like randomized controlled trials for every single question out there and feed them into an algorithm? How did you do this?
Sure. So I'm just going to pause the demo real quick and answer that question. So when we initially started the company, we realized that there was no existing database that really solved the problem we were trying to address. Because when you think about existing data, you have like claims data, you have electronic medical record data. Both of them actually skew towards people who have already decided to seek care, right? Mm-hmm. And according to our data, about 40% of the time when you're sick, you actually don't see anyone at all. And so if you train on that data, you're actually going to make people look sicker. And then also, interestingly, you're going to make them look sicker earlier. So the average person, according to our data, again, they don't get sick. They don't go to the doctor until they've been sick for about 3 days, but they turn to the internet, like Buoy, when they've been sick for less than 12 hours, about 70% of the time. And so we said, okay, well, if existing data sets aren't their answer, like where do we go for help? And then that's where I guess my experience as a medical student really came in. We're like, well, how does someone, educate themselves on signs and symptoms and risk factors to like look for? Well, you look at something like UpToDate, or you look at something like Dynamed, or you look at something like a medical textbook. Well, where does the data come from that? Well, it comes from primary literature, which might be, a study on bacterial pneumonia versus a common cold, and like what are the signs and symptoms that, separate those two presentations. So essentially, we did a meta-analysis per diagnosis across thousands of diagnoses.
Okay.
To build this massive graph of medicine, one that could understand how symptoms, risk factors, and diagnoses relate to each other statistically.
Fantastic.
And then that's like what drove the original algorithm. And then now that we've seen all these people and we figure out what's going on, that then continues to allow us to learn and get better.
That's awesome. So let's just unpack that for 1 second before you show that next part of your slide, which is
we do have one piece of feedback from Jo Lin in Singapore, who says, I love intellectually stimulating discussion, clinical study and data right up their alley.
Fantastic. So that is so true, because you are saying two different things I think are so important just to emphasize. One is, once you've come into the hospital, not only are you later in your course and we're not picking you up early, but you're actually given diagnoses, right? And those diagnoses that you are given are constrained by the electronic medical record, right? The kind of things we're going to put in for billing and claims. And all of us who are in, larger data-driven studies will tell you that there is a level of inaccuracy when we use claims data and when we use EMR data. And some of that is because exactly the symptom you're saying is being already translated by somebody into, I think that shortness of breath is this.
Yeah,
so I put it, right? So you maybe do this before me in the ER, Dr. Joe, right? Which is like,
I know the level of inaccuracy is there.
No, not that you're more inaccurate.
Maybe worse in the ER.
But you have to put something in to get that chest x-ray done. So you write pneumonia, right? And then that gets dragged along when actually it was heart failure later. Now, do we really remove the initial pneumonia? No, because the chest x-ray was tied to it and I don't know how to remove it. And so you see all of that come into the data, and there's so much interpretation and then ability to code. And, when I put in diabetes and they show me the 72 things I can pick, I wish I could be even more accurate than I am, but I get as close as I can, right? And so, by the way, this is probably a good time to say, none of the things that any of the four of us say here represent the institutions that we work for, but are really our own unique opinions and thoughts. So with that in mind, I think that's one thing. I think the second part of what you're kind of talking about is when you actually come in with those symptoms, it turns out that those symptoms alone are probably enough when well powered to be able to get you to the most likely diagnoses when you don't create filters along the way. And so you might actually be stronger at getting to the correct diagnoses using really good data. And I think that's part that's a little challenging for physicians, nurses, anyone else in the front line to hear, and yet will probably help us all long term in our careers to be able to work at top of license, because some of this is done for us already. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity. All right, sorry to cut you off. This is so exciting. Back to your diagnoses. So 3 possible diagnoses.
Right, and actually, it was a perfect tee up, Dr. Bhatt, to I guess the scope of Buoy, because I think whenever I talk about this, like at a cocktail party with a lot of doctors, for instance, I think the initial reaction is,
Wait, you go to cocktail parties with doctors? I'm just going to pause there.
back in the day, like way back in the day, pre 2020. But I think that the usual response is, "Oh, are you trying to replace my job?" That kind of thing. And that's far from what we're doing. What we're trying to do is replace the act of Googling, which is like a self-educational, self-diagnostic step. And so there's actually a regulatory lane, first of all, for the application of AI for purposes of self-education. You notice here, we're not calling it that you're diagnosed with anything. It's a match. And then we're going to give you transparency of thought into that. But then taking a step back into where we fit in the ecosystem, again, we're not replace the doctor. We're hoping that people come to the doctor when they're actually sick and they need help. And then those who don't need, to see with someone don't clog up the pipes for everybody else. And so we saw that play out quite a bit during the pandemic. We can talk a lot about that. But, when in the height, let's say April, May time period, the number of phone calls that were coming in were just breaking phone lines. And so we saw like a very intense example of that kind of supply demand kind of mismatch problem. And so then, it was a really good example of like what we're trying to do, which as I kind of share this, is really, again, to show people reasons for and against each kind of match based on how they answer those questions. We can show people, data and information about each of those matches. And then ultimately, if they do need to seek care, we take into account their clinical situation, their location, the time of day, and their benefit design to show them sites of care, virtual care options, individual, even individual clinicians that are in network for them that they could then go to have their problem addressed. And so, again, not trying to replace a clinician, but really make sure that the right people are seeing the doc.
This is, it's such a problem, actually, what you talk about, right? Getting in, especially now post-COVID, there were so many people who didn't come in for routine care for a whole year. And the majority of us now in the outpatient setting across all different disciplines are seeing twice the volume of people who need to come in. And we do this manually as, like individual physicians who we sit and we say, that patient can probably be e-consulted. We'll look it up online. This person can have a virtual. I don't think the exam's going to change everything we've seen there. This person really just needs to refocus with their primary care and head to pulmonary. This doesn't look cardiac, for example. And then this one really needs to get in sooner. That's a lot of work that you're asking individual humans to do for the volume of, tens to hundreds of thousands of patients who are coming into any given large clinic, right? And people are not powered to be able to do that. It also worsens burnout. It's a real clinician burnout is a real issue. And the upstream work of figuring out how to fit in sicker patients and how to still respect patients who may not have the same level of illness, but have a whole lot of anxiety, and just a visit with you is going to solve that. How do you do that? And so I love this idea that you have, because I think Bowie Health is an opportunity for us to change that upstream experience, make people a little bit more health literate, but also maybe even, I like your phrase. I try not to think of my pipelines as clogged right now. It makes me feel a little sad, but really change.
You're very popular.
We're very popular, but really change people's experience to be better. Like, this is not so bad. We're going to take care of you this way. It's going to be all right. And come on in, like, we got to go now, right? This is the time to do this. And so I think this is great. So thinking about you and growth, maybe this is a great time to bring on Dr. Shaan Gandhi.
I love it.
He's the director of Northpond Ventures. And this is a venture firm that's actually been in life sciences for quite a while, but is also in AI. So a great combination there of what they're focused on in a large portfolio. And Shaan was your med school classmate, we learned this morning. So that's fantastic. Let's bring on Dr. Shaan Gandhi.
And also say thank you to Pratima Bhatt for watching from Canada, Ontario, and also Ashvin Pillai just got off duty from COVID shift. So thank you for watching, and thank you for all the work you do. And bringing on Dr. Gandhi.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, great to have you with us, Dr. Gandhi. So you and Andrew both need to catch up, but we're not going to do it on the show today. So
absolutely.
Glad to have brought you back together. But will you do us a favor and tell us a little bit about Northpond, a little bit of your origin story and how you went from, clinical medicine out into venture capital and how you've grown it, because it's an amazing story.
Absolutely. So Northpond's a science-based venture capital firm where we partner with leading scientists, academics, and entrepreneurs to really have a very broad view of the life sciences ecosystem. We want to partner with really accomplished and smart people to imagine and impact society through extraordinary discoveries in life sciences and in technology. And my work at Northpond is primarily focused on its biotechnology efforts. So that's focused on the development of novel drugs, on the development of either small molecules, large molecules, all of the therapeutics that we see in the world. And then I frequently partner with my colleagues at Northpond that look at other aspects within the life sciences ecosystem, such as innovations on the diagnostic side, innovations on the software side, as well as innovations in scientific research. So when we think about, for example, the astounding progress we made over the last year in terms of understanding the biology of COVID-19, a lot of those advances were made by advanced tools that we now have access to that we didn't have access to even a few years ago. And so we want to invest in the next generation of those tools as well. And to your point about the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we see that as an overlay across the entire life sciences ecosystem, where by having these algorithmic approaches, we can optimize and accelerate the development of novel products. And definitely within therapeutics, as I'm sure we've all seen, the development of the COVID-19 vaccines were heavily aided by algorithmic approaches. It allowed Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, all these AstraZeneca, all these other companies to design the right RNA strand, design the right antigen in order to accelerate their vaccine discovery. So that's kind of in broad strokes what we do at Northpond. I've been at Northpond for about a year and a half now, and my journey started actually in residency, which I did residency at Mass General in medicine, and I just grew increasingly intrigued and passionate about where our tools come from. So if you think about, you're a cardiologist, but I mean, actually, Jen too, like we were all internists at one point in our lives, and fundamentally internists take drugs and apply them in the treatment of patients. And of course, we've been able to accomplish a lot with the tools that are currently in our armamentarium, but of course, we always could develop novel drugs. We could always develop better diagnostics that help us identify patients who could need therapy earlier. And so throughout residency, I just got more and more intrigued and more involved with those aspects of the life sciences ecosystem and of medicine. And so hence made the decision to switch to a career in venture capital, where I can work with a number of really outstanding companies and really a number of outstanding management teams to help realize their dreams of novel therapeutics, novel diagnostics that can really help medicine at the
That's fantastic. So, it's interesting. We had Jared Saul with us last week on the show, and he talked similar to what you're saying about the fact that we really need to think about the low-hanging fruit. And so as you talk about using machine learning and using AI across all of the different parts of that lifespan, right, that the life sciences kind of span, I think it's so true, because it is in the software, and it can be in the medications, and it can be in early drug development. And at all those different places, there are different things that we can do for people. And some of it is directly related to patient care, and others are related to making the system better, right? Which is what Dr. Lee is getting at, right? This is what Andrew's getting at, is making that system better. Right. So I think that definitely makes a difference. So for Northpond, will you just tell people a little bit more, where are you guys based? How big is that portfolio? And before you go there, Jen wants to get a comment in.
Oh, we have Pratima, who says, thank you for organizing these talks. And we have Jo Lin from Singapore saying, Bowie Health, sounds like you have a great AI system. I need your support to bring you to Asia. So, Andrew, if you're not in Asia yet, here's your opportunity.
That's great.
So
what about Northpond?
So we have 3 offices. Our headquarters are in Bethesda, Maryland, just down the road from the NIH, and then 2 other offices, one here in the Boston area in Cambridge, and then another in San Francisco. And we have, I think more than 40 portfolio companies at this point that really span the gamut. I mean, I can give you a sense of the diversity of companies that we've invested in. We have companies working on clinical trial recruitment, management, and software development. So you think about even the nuts and bolts, right, of running a trial, where you have protocols that are pushed to different sites. And if you ever need to make an amendment to that protocol, you need to make sure that all the sites get the memo, and that if there are any deviations from the protocol, that you record them, and that you are able to store them centrally in case you need to use it, for regulatory purposes, or even just to interpret the data. Up until recently, a lot of that was done using spreadsheets and using Word documents. And so we have a company in our portfolio, Techro, based in Ireland, that is automating that process using software, so that you can have truly multinational clinical trials recruiting thousands of patients, and you don't have to worry about the mountains of paperwork that come out of that. And so the hope is that you can accelerate the progress.
And a little encouragement for TechRo to also think about who we're enrolling in our trials, and really getting equitable enrollment and making sure that everybody is represented, right? So that's
exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
So it runs gamut from like companies like that to we have another company in our portfolio called Cipher Medicines that's based in Waltham, just outside of Boston, that's looking to use metabolites that are picked up in the peripheral blood of patients in order to identify whether a patient would benefit or not benefit from a particular treatment. So they're focusing on autoimmune disease, where we were able to diagnose autoimmune disease with different biomarkers, but we typically take a very empiric approach toward identifying which drugs would work in controlling the disease for patients. And so Cipher wants to take a precision medicine approach, right, much as what we often do in oncology, and apply it to the autoimmune space, where you can know a priori if a patient would benefit from a TNF-alpha inhibitor. And if you can find out that they don't, well, then we can save the person all that expense and frustration of taking a drug that isn't actually going to work for them, and try to find something else that works better.
Autoimmune is such a nice natural outpouring from oncology, but I will tell you, when they're done with that, could they work on hypertension? We could use a little help. Like, just, tell me which drug is going to work right away. And first, I would love that.
I thought everyone should just get an SGLT2 inhibitor. I feel like that's where all the data are.
There are lots of drugs. That's great. Oh, look, Malik has some comments for us.
Oh, Malik just says, awesome work.
Excellent.
So anyway, it runs the gamut of different companies, and again, it kind of goes back to our sense that we want to take a very holistic view of the life sciences ecosystem, and try to identify ways in which through the work of individual companies, that we really push all of medicine forward. And kind of like, again, what Andrew's doing with Buoy, where you're trying to democratize access to healthcare information. You're trying to make it easier for patients to learn about their own health, and then help them participate in the healthcare process. I mean, we do it anyway, right? Like, I'm a physician. I still Google stuff from time to time, right? It would be nice if there were an interface that you can actually interact with to to help understand more about your health.
That's great. So looking forward then, as now a doc slash VC person, where would you say the most excitement lies for you? It doesn't have to be your prediction for the future where things are going to go, but for you, if you said like, here are 2 areas where I hope we see more companies come, I hope there is more growth, where would that be? And Andrew, teeing you up for a very similar question next, you can start thinking.
We have 2 internal theses about medicine in the future of medicine. The first is an increased level of precision and personalization of treatments, where we now have the tools at our disposal to, at least for certain diseases. I think hypertension, is a pretty challenging one, but there are other diseases where we do know a little bit more about the biology and can start to identify specific patient populations that, at least biologically, their disease seems to be very similar. And so we're getting to that point where we're understanding enough about the biology of disease and the biology of different subsets of the disease, where we can start to design diagnostics to identify what subtype of disease someone has, but then also have therapeutics that are specifically tailored for that particular biology. So we see that as a major push within therapeutics development in the next couple of years, of personalizing our therapeutics much more, so that we would think that we understand the actual pathway that's involved in this particular disease subset, and then we're actually trying to intervene upon that pathway. And then
before you do your second, a question about that one. Jen knows what's coming. That
I know what's coming. There's also another question, but I don't know if Shaan actually invests in India. So let
Ashwin go first. This is a great question, actually.
It's a great question. Do you do world investments or just?
We do actually.
We
do invest outside of the United States. I think in particular, what we find interesting about investments outside of the United States is that the prevalence of different diseases have different prevalences. And there are different capabilities that different areas in the world have. So like in India, for example, there's a lot of capacity for manufacturing and for kind of outsourced R&D. And so there's actually a lot of opportunities that we've seen in India where they can capitalize on those resources in order to either make variants of drugs that could be better equipped to serve different markets other than the United States, or actually accelerate research faster because of the infrastructure and resources that those particular regions have.
Excellent. Dr. Pillai, it is great to have you back because your insights are always. I was actually going to ask you something very similar about globalization and how we take something like personalized medicine, which in the U.S. sounds great, and really bring it to the parts of the world that need it. And you just answered that because Dr. Pillai and I have missed you, Ashwin, because your questions have always been that's what I want to ask next. Andrew, let's turn to you for a second and also get your thoughts. So tell me 2 things. So one is, and you may not be able to speak for the company, but you are the CEO, so I'm going to ask you. So Bowie Health.
Speak for the company.
I guess you can, right? so the 3 of us can't speak for a company. So you got it. Yeah. No, but looking forward, right? I love the concept of how many millions of searches you guys have had, and how people are becoming more health literate, and all the stuff we talked about. What's next? What's next for the kind of platform that you are building? Where do we go from here? How can you use this next? I would just love to hear kind of your thoughts. And you have to promise that this is what Bowie Health is doing, but just for the kind of work you do, where are we going next? How will this change, revolutionize medicine?
It had a pretty massive rise during COVID. So I will say I followed it. I was really impressed. Bowie Health, my understanding is that it was the go-to symptom flow for Massachusetts of do you potentially have COVID or not, which was crazy impressive, Andrew.
Oh, thanks for saying that, Dr. Joe. And then to answer your question, Dr. Bhatt, actually, it was kind of a nice segue from what Shaan was describing. We think about the personalization of what people do as the ultimate goal of our platform. And when I say personalization of what people do, the personalization, that it's a means to what end, and the end here is efficiency from a time and a cost perspective to the person, And depending on who you are, you want to get treated differently, right? That's something that we were taught in medical school. What are you solving for when you have elbow pain? Well, I want to go play tennis again. I know someone else with the exact same elbow pain, with the exact same underlying diagnosis, might not care about playing tennis. They just want to be able to pick up their kids. And so, how you get that person into the most efficient care for their, for what they're solving for, in addition to, what their underlying clinical condition is where we're headed. And I guess more tactically, we have 30 million people a year coming to Buoy.com. And then we have, a lot of these insurance companies, employers who, purchase Buoy on behalf of their employees and their members. The next stage for us is actually to enable the financial transaction directly on Buoy, such that we can take another piece of the pain point out, which is beyond, Dr. Gandhi is a network for you. He's down the street. But now it's actually like, how can we actually enable it? How do we make it easier for the flow of money? Because we know that paying for healthcare and the cost of healthcare, like both of those things, is a huge pain point for someone who's thinking about going to care. Mm-hmm. And so that's really kind of the next stage in service of that longer term vision of making healthcare completely approachable and personalized for you as a patient.
That's fantastic. This is so exciting. And the word efficiency, people talk about it a lot. When you talk about, I believe, right? Like, I believe. I'm like, yes, this can happen. I'll throw out one other thought, which is, as we think about our digital health colleagues who are watching and come on the show and do our Telemed Now Twitter and Clubhouse with us at MedTech. The concept of, let's say I come to you, I'll use an example from, we had Simple with us, the CEO is Shaan Gandhi. And, the idea that if somebody comes to you with back pain from an injury, if there were also a way to be able to link them directly to some of these companies who are actually available online, who can give them support online, behavioral health. Right now, it's tricky because you have to you're providing health care, but in a way you're not. You're directing them just like you would to Shaan Gandhi down the street. Instead, you're directing them to online companies that may be able to interact with them in their home. And so I think about physical therapy and behavioral health immediately, because those markets are maybe the largest and the ones where people are waiting the longest and could benefit the most by engaging earlier. So I'll just plant a little seed, but I think those kind of things would also be really exciting for the efficiency of that experience. This has been such a joy. I don't know how the time goes so fast. What both of you are doing and what your companies have done is really phenomenal. With both of you having so much foresight into what the future could be like, and really centering that on the patient and the clinician experience, making it enjoyable to do medicine again. So really appreciate having both of you on. Dr. Joe, I'll give you the last word.
Really appreciate both Shaan and Andrew joining us. You guys, I've followed your work. Shaan, you've been a good friend and supporter for a long time. Thank you for that. So very impressed with what you're doing. And also, as always, thank you to our audience for tuning in, watching from India, from Singapore, from Canada, and also locally from Boston. We really appreciate that. Thank you to Andrew, Shaan, and also Ami.
Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
Tuesday.
All right, we'll see you next week at noon.